typically I don't even I've adjusted. So I used to introduce the guests, and then I started passing the baton and letting them introduce themselves. And I think sometimes there's just more it's just a little bit more genuine. And this way
Yeah.
you get to really share with the audience and the listeners who you are and what you're doing. But we'll get into that in a minute. First, I want to talk about what you're doing because
Mhm.
my understanding now, and this is not the first time we've had a conversation, but I just want to make sure I understand. You've worked with several Fortune 500 companies, brands that are known very well, the names that are very well. So, how did you get into those situations? Like, how did you get those big? Because in the sales world, we call those the whales, right?
Yeah.
Those are those big opportunities, and usually the sales cycle takes forever. And the fact that you were able to do that, kudos to you.
Thank you.
So what's the secret sauce? What do people have to do to get to be on track in the same light that you did?
Yeah, no, great question. And that kind of goes back to how I started my business was I actually started trying to service like smaller agencies. And what I found was it was actually just my mindset because it was almost harder to reach out to smaller businesses because they didn't quite need the services I had. So I do innovation consulting where typically I'm helping companies think of their next products, their next services, larger engagements, like you said. And so when I tried to reach out to smaller businesses, it was often the fit was off. And I would spend more time explaining why they needed to do it than actually working with them. So I ended up transitioning to larger businesses, and my first client was actually Starbucks, which a lot of people love that brand. So that was sort of a great, like as you said, kind of a whale to get as a first client. And the way I did it was they actually didn't have budget at first to work with us, so we offered to do it for free. And so we offered to do the first project as a pilot to see how it goes. So we sort of poured our passion into that project. We over delivered. And then after that, we got about 8 or 10 projects from them.
Good for you.
So I would say with corporate engagements, one thing I would say is not to be afraid to do something for free or to do a pilot, because a lot of times they have those types of, I don't want to say expectations, but they might have experienced that from other types of business models where they've gotten a pilot or a free preview. It's not the same as when you're working kind of one-on-one with a smaller business and you're worried about getting taken advantage of. I would say that one thing maybe to clarify in the beginning is to frame it as a pilot so that they know that you're doing it as a way to showcase your work, to showcase what you're good at. And if there's a good alignment and a good partnership model moving forward, then they're going to consider your services for a longer term partnership. So I found framing really helps in the beginning with doing a free pilot. So knowing your intentions going in, being clear about those, letting them know your pricing model. So that way they're not shocked coming out of it then when they do want to work with you. So that way you have a good alignment.
Right. So, it's so interesting. So you're working with major corporations. And so you mentioned Starbucks. I'm going to just play on that. So, and you're an innovator. You come in and you help the visionaries in the group come up with the new products, the new ideas, the next thing, right?
Mhm.
It's so interesting because typically you would think that has to come from within, right? You would think that Starbucks has all of the resources within. So how do you position yourself as like, well, you've got this great team and we're not coming in to compete with them because you don't want them to feel like you're stepping on toes, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that and circumvent egos and pride and well, we don't need it, we've got enough. Like how do you do that?
Yeah, great question. And I almost think this is sort of universal across different spaces you could work in, like whether it's leadership or strategy, just people feeling like maybe they don't need it. Maybe they're already using another vendor or another solution, or maybe you feel like you're one of many in a space. I feel like how I circumvented that was really focusing on how what I did was different. And so focusing on the process of what I do, because nobody can replicate exactly how you do something or the way that your methodology works or the way your brain works. So I focused more on what we did that was different. And as time went on, as I had the bigger clients in my tool belt, like GSK or Starbucks or Johnson and Johnson, I would highlight to those companies how I worked with other companies in the past. And, even though this is a large company, they still hired us because they saw the value in having an outside partner, having a different perspective. There's a really interesting book by Adam Grant, who's I know sort of famous in some circles for a lot of his thinking. He has a book about how you don't know, how there's things you don't know, but you don't know what those things are until you know them. And so a lot, it's sort of a mouthful, but I like sharing that with clients because I always explain our services as like there's something you don't know that you want to know, and you have to go do research to figure out what that is. And
Mhm.
so it's sort of a failure when we think that we know everything or the way
Oh
we've
my
done everything
gosh.
over time.
It is a failure, so in psychology and in coaching and the work that I do with my clients, and I just had this conversation with a client earlier. It's called, you go from unconscious incompetence. So unconscious incompetence means you don't even know that you don't know what you need to know because you just don't know it's even there, right? And then you go to unconscious, then you go to consciously incompetent. So now you become aware of, oh, I now realize that I need to learn this, right? And with AI, and we'll talk about AI too a little bit because I know that you work in AI a lot. We'll talk about, the going to consciously incompetent, and then you go to, consciously incompetent because you're just learning, right? And then you go to consciously competent, and that's really when you're mastering. So you have gone all the way through, and you literally are walking your clients, your potential clients at that point, right? Because they're still prospects. You're walking them through that, saying, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm going to show you what you don't know. And then you're going to want to know it. So you're going to need to hire me so I can show you how to do what you don't know how to do right now because you didn't know that you didn't know it. Wow.
I know it's so
Did we
wordy,
record that? We
but I love
recorded that, right?
it. I know I love that. And I love like it's kind of a good philosophy too, just to have as a human, like realizing there's things you don't know that you will figure out in the process of of going through the actual learning process or the journey. So even framing, I think, to clients that you're going on a journey with them, like when I tend to start working in a category, I also don't know what they're going to figure out in the process, but we're going to go through it together because we're going to do all the research. We're going to immerse ourselves. We're going to try it from a different angle. A lot of times we're using more lateral thinking or adjacency based thinking. So a lot of times clients will hire me because I'm bringing something new and fresh. So an outside perspective that's coming from a different category. So I would say even for those who want to work with corporations, just sort of realizing that your fresh perspective a lot of times is what they're looking for. I couldn't believe one time Nike almost hired me to do a manifestation workshop because they heard me talking about manifestation trends. And I love manifesting. I don't coach on it. It's just an area of passion I have. But there was a lot of trends about consumers believing in manifestation, law of attraction. So I did a webinar on it, and then Nike reached out to ask, well, hey, could you teach us about manifestation? So you just never know what people are willing to pay for, right? Like,
Yeah.
and what just kind of being authentic and in alignment, I think you tend to attract the right opportunities. So I would say, even with corporate, don't discount yourself. Just sort of put yourself out there, and you'll sort of attract the right clients that are open to that stuff. Because I can tell you, there's some Fortune 500 companies that would never pay for a manifestation workshop. It just wouldn't be in their culture. But there's plenty of those that will pay for it. So I think that was my big learning too.
That's really interesting. All right, so now let's talk about you a little bit. So, because this is really supposed to be about you, by the way. So, so tell the audience and the listeners who you are, the name of your company, how many years you've been doing this, like what's your background? How did you get started in this?
Yeah, and I'll kind of go in a non-linear way, which is how my brain processes. But I've been doing innovation now for about 15 years. So I have my firm right now where we focus more on AI-based forecasting. So that was the biggest transition that I've kind of seen the last several years, just like everyone else, is that almost AI has sort of inundated and taken over a lot of processes. So I've moved over into that space. But prior to that, I was doing innovation, I would say the more manual way. So everything I do with AI now, I was doing before. I was just doing it myself or doing it with my team members, or we were hunting and kind of scraping online for research. So I did that for about 10 years and then I sold that business. So that business was sold about 2 years ago, was a big transition for me. So I've had, as an entrepreneur, I guess, two businesses now. The first one felt like my third child. I was like so much a part of me. I lived and kind of breathed it. This business has been very different for me because everything is so automated now that it's been interesting to sort of streamline and be a lot more. I heard this term once called chillpreneur, but it's this idea that you can sort of set up systems and processes to just kind of be a little more relaxed and kind of in the flow. So I feel like it's very much like a second child to me, where your second child, you're just a lot more relaxed, you're a lot more go with the flow. You're a lot more of a chill parent than you were the first time around.
Yep.
So
I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate to that. So wait, so go back for a second. What's the name of the company you have now?
it's called Hypersight Labs.
Hypersight Labs. Okay. And so, um, and I just kind of want to use this as an example, and I hope it's okay. And I don't know if you're allowed to say this or not, if you have an NDA or whatever, but is there a specific product that we all know or have heard of, especially like with Starbucks or one of the other ones, where you were behind the scenes that we could kind of correlate and say, oh, that was Kalyn.
Yeah, so one I can talk about that I did at my previous company because they've already launched it is we worked with Hershey's and they launched the Jolly Rancher freeze-dried candy.
No, freeze-dried Jolly Rancher. What?
So that one's more of a mass market example. And with Starbucks, there were so many things that came out, so many different beverages. A tricky thing with innovation, though, is typically it's so front end in the process. So when you think of coming up with an idea, then it goes through marketing, it goes through regulatory, it goes through their legal process. So sometimes by the time we get done, it turns into something, it's like a Frankenstein, right? Like maybe the original idea is now morphed into version 10 of the idea. So a lot of times I don't always get to see my, like, I call them like the creation babies. You don't always get to see them come to life. But I've worked across so many categories. We've innovated on like toilet paper before, where you were thinking of like scented inner tubes to the toilet paper. Or I've done Starbucks where it was thinking about new flavor profiles or how could they move into frozen more. And then with Jolly Rancher, we were thinking of how do you reimagine hard candy? So bringing it into freeze dried, bringing it into new formats that you haven't seen before. So typically all of the projects, they usually start with clients wanting to know what the future looks like for their category. And they're always trying to sort of reinvent what they're doing to meet the new consumer need that's going to happen. So, right now, me and you probably couldn't say we might have some pain points with products, but it's probably hard for us to imagine in 3 years what we're going to want. So it's a hard thing just to ask the consumer, what do you want that you don't have? So a lot of innovation is based on looking at trend signals. So we look typically at other categories to see how is expectations shifting in a way that's unconscious for a lot of people. So I love that you mentioned that because a lot of it is unconscious, our expectations around how they're evolving.
Yeah. And then it's funny because when you see something that's an innovative idea, you're like, oh, I could have thought of this. Like, this is a great, like, this seems like it should have always been like this, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think and that's it, kind of what you want to have happen is because that's almost like people are primed then for that innovation, or it means that we hit the mark correctly, that that was something that they were unconsciously looking for, and then it just became a conscious decision at that point that they're seeing it.
Mhm.
I think a lot of innovation lately I've noticed is it's moving a lot faster, especially in food and beverage. If you go to the grocery store now, you just look at how many product launches there are, how many collaborations. So I think things have gotten faster with TikTok trends and um, AI now. It's just evolving at a much faster speed. So I think a lot of our clients are wondering how to stay ahead, and also they're feeling just like most of us, sort of overwhelmed with technology, just overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there.
Yeah. So I just want to talk for a minute about the trends versus fads. So it's so interesting. So I remember when I don't, and I honestly don't remember. I think it was Wendy's who first came out with you can get a cheeseburger, fries, and a shake, which is very fattening and filled with processed chemicals and all of that. And yet, if your wife wants to come with you, we got a salad for her, right? I think they were the first ones who had salads. I'm not sure, but I think they were. And then I remember having a conversation, and this is going back over a decade ago, saying, "Oh, that's just a fad. That's just a fad." And that actually turned into a trend. So, what can you explain? How long is a fad before they realize, oh no, this is trending and we better hop on board?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So I think a lot of times we see fads, they're usually manifestations of a larger trend that's happening. So they're usually more downstream. So I like to think of it like probably the salad trend was probably a larger bucket around healthier fast food options that was starting to emerge, or the desire for fresh food. So how it manifested at McDonald's and Wendy's might have been salads, but how it manifested in other trends was Panera. So
Yes.
then you started having the birth of fast casual like Chipotle, or other business models where there is fresher, healthier food options available. So their desire was there. They were right about that. That was the trend. But the way they maybe articulated it is more of a fad, because those products will change. Their salads became more, they probably went to more gourmet salads. They probably took some of them away. They didn't really expand into other fresh food. So for them, it might be a very small skew, but for some other businesses, that's their entire business model, is to hit on that trend of having fresher, more healthy options now.
Yeah, I think of Kava. And I'm not promoting
Yeah,
any one particular brand, but I know you walk in there and it's all like quinoa and avocado, and you can add, kale. And so I do think that it was a springboard. And I think you're right. I think the core product, and I think this is another thing that I've seen corporations, like when they're really solid and they know what they're good at, they stick to what they're good at. So the hamburgers, the French fries, and the shakes will always be the core foundation for the Wendy's, the McDonald's, the Burger Kings, and they'll add those other things in just to appease a smaller group. But then you have those other companies that are really like blowing it out of the water. I mean, there's a there's a chain, a fast food taco chain called Velvet Taco. Have you heard of?
yeah,
And they're like healthy tacos. And I think they're not, well, they're not in, I don't think they're in the Northeast. I know they're in Texas and they're in those areas. My son actually worked for them, and my nephew was actually part of that financial group that, was building them out. But so you look at those names and you see these things, and some of us who are in the general population, we're not looking at consciously, we're not looking at what we want and how we want to live our lives better. Like we'll say, maybe I wish this would be, but there actually are people like you, thankfully, who are looking forward, who are saying, how can we better serve? And I think it's all about being in service, because you're not going to launch a product that's not going to be in service to people, or that's something that they don't want. So people have that
yeah.
desire, right, inherently. So as an innovator, how do you find how do you find that? Do you do a focus group? Do you do market testing? What do you do?
Well, and that kind of comes down to methodology. There's so many different companies that have different methodologies of how they're going to help you solve those questions. And sort of depends too on where the client's starting from, whether they have a product idea already, or maybe they have zero ideas. They want to figure out what are we not thinking about. But there's a few methodologies I could talk about. So for me, I believe in trend work. So I look at how can we forecast what's coming by looking at sort of these unconscious signals that people are being exposed to. So I don't, Steve Jobs sort of famously said this, that if you asked consumers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And they would have never said the iPhone. His whole point
Yeah,
is
he's
that
right.
a lot of times, and sometimes people will argue, well, that's disruptive innovation. Maybe I'm Wendy's and I am just trying to think about what the next new product line is. I don't need a iPhone level innovation. But I still think there's a lot of unconscious signals we can look at within any industry. So within food and beverage, we can look at how are people consuming other types of food products? Are they gravitating more to textures? When we look at they're the dieting trends, the cookbook trends, the different kind of menu trends we're seeing. What are people being exposed to? And then even going out in adjacency, we might look at fitness trends. So what is the fitness community doing? So we start to go out and there's certain levels of adjacencies is how I like to think of it. And we start to paint a picture of what are the major themes we see that are coming. So that's one way. Another way that I also look at is how that aligns with jobs that consumers are hiring a brand to do for them. So there's a lot of kind of famous frameworks around jobs to be done where maybe there's a job around helping me relax. So every night you're going to either hire your ice cream or you're going to hire your tea brand or you're going to hire, for some people, it might be a beer. You're going to hire one of those products. So you're going to pay for that product to do that job for you because you want to relax, you want to unwind for the night.
Really interesting. That's a real, and I don't want you to give all your secrets away. I
Yeah.
just I'm thinking about it's a whole different way of thinking is really what that is.
Yeah, and that's like it's like similar to what you were saying with psychology. It's just a methodology for how to think about a certain way of developing a framework for how do you even solve this type of question. I mean, if you ask somebody, what are you going to want in 3 years? How do our whole methodology is based on how to answer that type of question.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So, just hold on 1 second. Sorry. Um, Sorry. She's gonna have to cut that out. Somebody tried to get in. He's an hour early. I'm sorry.
No, no worries.
Hold on. I can't pause the recording. She'll just cut this out. We're scheduled for, yeah, 11:30. I don't know why he's so early. Sorry about that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so, all right, we're gonna start again. Are you good with what we've been doing so far? Are you okay with
Yeah,
this conversation?
yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
and I don't want to put you in a position where you're sharing information that you don't want to share. So if I ask a question that you'd rather not answer, just, circumvent it, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not putting you in an uncomfortable situation. Um, okay. All right, so we're going to start again. Okay, so thinking so differently, how do you how did you develop that skill and then turn that into a business? Go back to when you turn this into a business.
Mhm.
How did you do that?
Yeah, it's very, I would say, an atypical career. Like even my mom still doesn't understand what I do 100%, and she's heard about it for years. Well, I went to school for fashion, for product development, which product development is all just how do you develop a fashion product? Not necessarily the design of it, but just the actual like production. How do you research it? And what I found was interesting was I took a trend forecasting class and we learned how fashion companies predict trends. But for me, I started applying it to other things like, well, why don't we see this in shampoo or body wash or nail polish? But why can't we take the same process and apply it? Because fashion brands, they historically have paid a lot of money for trend forecasting. So they would hire big trend forecasting houses to give them direction for where the trends are going. And they would also utilize that to create their whole collection. So I feel like fashion companies did the best job at this. So then I started at an innovation firm where I was lucky that my boss mentor was into trends and sort of a trend expert herself. So we would use trends as part of every presentation. So no matter we were doing dog food or, even cat litter projects, we would look at trends that were happening in things like sustainability or food trends. How does that cross over to dog food? And then after that, I ended up wanting to start my own company where I basically just was like, I want to blow this up. I want to have it like 10x. So just utilizing trends to be able to predict out where product development should go. And a lot of what I found, and I think this is kind of as you get more immersed in something, you become more of an expert at it. I learned that a lot of times corporate individuals, they weren't necessarily looking at trends. So they were more doing it other types of methodologies. So I just found that there was white space for myself. So I think it's like with anything, once you become more immersed in it, you can find the white space for yourself where the gap is between what people are doing and maybe what they're missing.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really good thing for listeners to hear is so find the gap, find the space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, looking at where you are now, and so what's an ideal client? Who do you really want to work with? And then if there's somebody out there that's interested in your services, how do they find you?
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned earlier, mostly Fortune 1000 companies, or even I would say more of a mid-tier company that maybe isn't in the Fortune 1000 list, but is still large enough to have an innovation function or to have a product development function. And the reason that we kind of talked about this earlier in the call is not to sell yourself short, because a lot of times we might think we have to build a business with just smaller companies, but if your services are better positioned for a larger company, you might actually find more success there, like I have. And I think that's because it's just better geared towards those types of companies. A smaller company can't necessarily work on innovation because they're usually trying to launch, they're trying to pay for marketing services. So I just found that understanding the right market fit is really important too, not just assuming that you have to go after smaller businesses just because you're starting out. So for me, I think corporate innovation or insight professionals tend to be the best fit. And they can find me at hypersightlabs.com. So typically we'll do a free pilot for clients that are interested in learning more.
Nice. Say it again slower.
Labs.com.
Hypersightlabs.com. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then is there any last suggestion, advice, thought that you would want to leave with the listeners or anything that you just feel like very passionate about, like your purpose statement, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I think I really liked what we talked about earlier about just being aware of kind of your unconscious thoughts. And I think I mentioned this earlier. I'm really big on manifestation. So I think just kind of writing out your goals is always really important to me, and kind of putting them in front of you somewhere you can see them. I find that it becomes more conscious for you that way. And then hopefully you're aligning your business activities with those actions.
Okay, the alignment is really important. So it
Yeah.
being in alignment and in congruency. And I love the writing the goals. One of the things that we do a lot with clients here is we have them start with the basics. What's on your bucket list? What's on your vision board? And then we attach numbers to it. And sometimes people are like, why are you attaching numbers to it? And well, okay, so now we have to take what's in your mind, what you want, and yes, you want to manifest it. And I think when you said like law of attraction, some people I don't want to say misrepresent, but there's a little bit of a incongruency because they think that if they just say, I'm going to win the lottery, it's going to happen. So what you have to do is you do have to lean into it and you do have to work towards it, right? So when you have a goal, you have something on your bucket list, for the clients that we work with, what we do is we take that and we turn that into the business plan for them. We tie a number to it and we say, okay, so for that to happen by this date, what do you have to do every day? 1, 2, 5 things every day that's going to move you in that direction. And that's how my clients end up manifesting what they wanted. They realize that it's not just about, just looking up at the sky and saying, I want to manifest something, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is when you write it down, it becomes so much more real. I did
100%.
this the other day where I wrote down a list of everything I was trying to bring in that month, and then I realized that I had actually already done it. So I like added up all the sales I had and kind of everything, all the conversations I had had, and I was like, oh wow, I've already achieved my goal, but I would have never known had I not wrote it down, gotten alignment. So I think sometimes we can be so busy that if we're not being intentional, we just sort of add to the noise. We don't necessarily go, realize that we're actually on track to manifest or to kind of bring in the things that we have as sort of our loftier goal items.
Yeah, I think that is really important. So I don't know if you're familiar with Jack Canfield. Do you know the name?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jack Canfield, so for those of you listening who don't know who he is, He was one of the first co-authors of Chicken Soup for the Soul, for that series that, it's global, and it's in, I don't know, 100 and something different languages. I don't even know all the stats for it, but one of the things that we talk about, when he does his trainings, and it's in his books, and he talks about the whole thing about when you write down. So first of all, you have these goals in your head. So to just, reiterate and to, springboard off of what you just said, he talks about you have these goals, and most of us do, or we just have it in our heads, and we think we're hitting our goals. We think we're doing what we're doing. And then he said, you write it down. And I think this is a statistic that might have changed over time because of all, like, we're getting bombarded with social media and everything. But at some point, writing it down gets you probably at least 30% to 40% closer to actually achieving that goal. So now it's not in your head, you've written it down. To make it 80%, you tell somebody. When it's in your head, you write it down, and then you share it with somebody, you have an 80% more likelihood of actually achieving the goal. And again, the stats might have shifted. I'm going to have to do a little research. So it might even be more than that now, because so many people get so sidetracked and they get squirreled by all these different things because we're bombarded every day with advertisements from, now it's going to be Jolly Rancher with the frozen version of it, which I can't even imagine. But anyway, so I remember when those candies came out. That's how old I am. So, but they're going to be bombarded with all these things. So how do you stay aligned and make sure that you're intentional and focused? Because it's so easy to get distracted and to take yourself off the path. And then pulling yourself back on the path again can actually take more energy than if you had just stayed on it in the first place. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm gonna definitely do some of the things you said because I love Jack Canfield. I actually had his book that he wrote on. It wasn't Chicken Soup for the Soul, but it was all kind of about purpose and intention. You probably
Oh,
know
his
what I'm
big
talking
book, The
about.
Success Principles, the big fat book.
Yes, that one.
Okay, so it's the Success Principles. And I used to assign this to clients. It's like 75 chapters. And my clients would be like, I'm not reading 75. I said, just read one chapter a week.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's in
it's
there.
a
And he
great
talks
book.
about E plus R equals O. It's the event plus your reaction determines your outcome. And then we talk about shifting habits, and it's very much in alignment with the coaching that I do. And then you're already on that path. It sounds like you're very self-aware, which is huge. And I hope my listeners are as self-aware as you are, because you're on your path, and it sounds like you're really in congruency and in alignment with what your purpose and passion is. And it's wonderful to see that. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's been so great to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. We really appreciate you coming on. If you just want to say again, the website, your name and the company name, and then the website again, that would be phenomenal. So this way people can find you.
Yeah, so Kalyn Rozanski at Hypersight Labs, and it's hypersightlabs.com.
Awesome. All right, Kalyn, thank you again so much for coming on. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Gotta love,